Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, I want to welcome you back to the second hour of the Exceptional Conservative Show live from the nation's capital. This is Open Heart Closed Case Night. Ladies and gentlemen, as we are not ashamed of the good news conservatism, for it is the power of liberation, first to the Republican and then to the tyrant. Our nightly focus on Friday nights, it's a very tough night because it's in memory of my daughter, Shanice Milton, who was killed in May 27th, 2015 in Washington, D.C. She was used as a human shield between two gang members. We made a commitment that on Friday nights we would actually deal with public policy issues regarding public safety, unresolved homicides, missing persons, teen suicides, and child abuse cases. Well, I can think of no bigger public policy issue right now than the health of the President of the United States and the First Lady and members of the White House staff who have come down with COVID-19. And contracting that, many on the left, the Democrat Marxists, as was to be referred to by Dr. Hotze before we had to break away, are basically dancing in the streets and hoping that the flags will be a half-mast very soon and that the Trumps will not survive. But we know medically from diagnoses and data that that's not going to be the case. There's a 99% recovery rate in America when it comes to COVID-19. It says Dr. Stephen Hotze did advise earlier that it is a very small number of people that actually die from COVID-19. With the appropriate medical care and treatment and follow-up, individuals will do extremely well. But it is very much so that particular issue of politics, as COVID has been politicized by those on the left, that we brought in tonight Jonathan Jakubowski, who is the author Bellwether Blues, a conservative awakening by the millennial soul, and I wanted to talk with him tonight about that. Let's go to him right now. Jonathan, thank you so much for making time out of your busy schedule to be with us this particular evening.
Thanks for having me on, Ken. I'm honored to be on your show.
Excellent. Jonathan, and first I need to apologize. Our marketing staff, when they sent out the information, denoted that you were someone else. And I do apologize for that, Jonathan. As we have learned from Black Lives Matter, all of us look alike. So there you go. So I want to ask you here, if you have experience in the past, say 24 hours from the announcement of the Trumps contracting COVID, a certain sense of celebration in the efforts of the left regarding that situation.
Yeah, I think there's been a wide variety of responses, and unfortunately there have been some celebratory responses amongst those who hate him. I think the hatred of the left and the vitriol has led them to the point of desiring his death. And there's many out there that do desire that. And then I've also seen some responses that give me some hope that there is some humanity, some people wishing the president well and saying that they're praying for him amongst Democrats that are out there. So the good news, I think, is that there is some individuals that have compassion and care, and they're not letting their political partisan vitriol move them to the point of even desiring the president's death. But there are certainly many out there who are reflecting that worldview, unfortunately.
Unfortunate mental illness observed. In regards to COVID-19 and being diagnosed with that, is America going to sway its votes to Joe Biden because they believe that Joe Biden would never have contracted the COVID illness and at the same time would have protected all Americans from contracting it?
Yeah, I don't think that's the case, and I think it's important when we talk about America that we divide it into the sections that are going to make the greatest impact on the Electoral College count this coming November. As you know, the coast, there might be a lot of Oregonians and Californians who have that conviction and belief and are going to vote in that direction. Believe that Joe Biden would have prevented any deaths from happening with COVID. But a lot of people here in mainland America, I'm calling in from the state of Ohio, one of the perennial swing states or bellwether states, as we're called. And in this state, there is a lot of voters out there who don't believe that. They're not going to buy the fake news media, and they're trying to figure out exactly what it is that's going to drive them in the direction of who to vote for this coming November. And with the series of events that have happened, it seems like every day there's some major piece of news that's hitting the airwaves. I think there are a number of voters that continue to hold out, wondering, what are the policy proposals of these candidates, and how are they going to impact my life? And as a result of that kind of decision-making process, that's what's going to lead them to determine which way they're going to go. And here in one of the swing counties and swing states, I think many are going to go for the president.
You believe that America wants another 4 years for Donald Trump? Do you really think that? We've been moving so fast to socialism, and people want socialized health care, and they want to get $1,000 a month from the government. Don't you know that?
Yeah, I know there are some Americans that do, and I did a big deep dive into the millennial generation specifically. And what I can tell you, Ken, is that there are differences between Americans that are pretty large. We're a very large nation, so there's
Yeah.
quite a representation of diverse opinions. But the coasts, New York and Massachusetts, California, Oregon, these states are very different from states like Ohio and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. And the citizens of those states are different. Even between the generations, they're different. And as we look at, thankfully, we have an electoral college. There are really a few states, about 13, that are going to really decide where this election is going to go. And sometimes we don't know which state's going to make the difference. For example, in 2000, everybody remembers Florida with the hanging chads, but few remember that if Bush had not swung West Virginia, he would have lost that election. So we don't always know which state's going to make an impact, but we have an idea as to which will. And the states that are the ones that are going to really be deciding this election in 2020, absolutely they reject socialism. I think most of the citizens in these states reject socialism and reject the radical leftist ideals that are coming out of the coast. Having said that, I think there's still some ground to be covered by the Trump campaign to communicate effectively why his policy making over the last 4 years is going to help them flourish for the next 4 years, and why they should vote for him, even if they might not like the way he communicates or the debate. They struggled with the attacks. I think that there's kind of a real challenge that the Trump campaign has to figure out over the next several weeks as to how they can communicate that effectively.
John, I have to play devil's advocate in the District of Columbia tonight. It's the job of someone who's a commentator. And so, in being a devil's advocate, do you believe that Joe Biden was right, that maybe Donald Trump should have hid out in the bunker for 6 to 10 months until the election, and then step out so that he would not have contracted COVID? Has he handled the COVID-19 pandemic irresponsibly or carelessly?
So I think one of the big questions in this election is how the president handled the pandemic. And when you go all the way back to turning back the clock in February, first of all, this is like an unprecedented pandemic that we haven't had hit our shores in over 100 years. So I think the American people give a lot of grace to our leaders at the gubernatorial level as well as the presidential level, as to some of the decisions that they were making. And one of the things we know is that President Trump closed the border to China immediately when Joe Biden called him a racist and xenophobic. What would have happened to America if Joe Biden would have been in office and would have left that border open for another month? I think we would have seen thousands of more deaths,
Mm.
thousands of more vulnerable deaths, because that virus would have come into our shores at a much more rapid rate. So I'm not going to say the president was perfect. How could you be perfect when you're dealing with something unprecedented? I'm sure there's things that him and his team wish they could have improved upon, but there was a lot that he did being a businessman to turn the private sector into a weapon against this invisible enemy. I mean, there was not one American that went without a ventilator. That's pretty impressive. The work
Yes.
that we did to develop capacity in the hospital system, it's an impressive fact, and it's an impressive fact of the matter. The other thing is I think Americans, now that we know the virus, we've had it on our shores now for months. we understand who is most vulnerable. We understand who are the ones that are most at risk, diabetes patients, the elderly. So we got to protect that vulnerable population and yet live life. If we surrender to this virus and shut down the economy again, as Joe Biden proposes, potentially in January, that's going to create devastating consequences that could lead to suicide, will lead to business loss. My business was deeply hurt by the shutdown. Now, I understood why we had to do it initially to learn what it was and how dangerous it was. But if there's another shutdown, there's going to be incredible business closure, more dependency on the government, more bankruptcy, negative GDP rates. So I think Trump's vision for how we handle this virus reflects the courage of Americans from generations past. And again, he wasn't perfect, but I think his general attitude is we're going to take this on. We're going to figure it out. We're going to protect the most vulnerable amongst us. We're going to do the common sense things to make sure that our private sector and the innovation therein that was leveraged in order to make sure that we had capacity and we had resources is leveraged in an appropriate way. So I do think that he did better than Biden would have.
Do, do you believe that his role and his responsibility as president of the United States to fill the open spot on the Supreme Court, or should that be left to someone who is elected in the next term?
Well, first, yeah, let me. You make a good point here. What is the president's responsibility according to the U.S. Constitution? It's enumerated specifically within Article 2, and of course, there's been amendments that have followed. And I would say amongst those responsibilities, we have to recognize that we live in a nation of federalism. So there are significant power that goes down to the level of the states and the governors in our nation. Just to go back before I answer this question, we look at the states, and some of the state responses by governors have really reflected the philosophy of the various worldviews we're talking about, conservatism and leftism and liberalism. And we look at the states that were most affected by the virus, specifically the state of New York and New Jersey, and some of the devastating consequences that followed the mismanagement of those local governors versus the governor of Florida, for example, or my governor, the governor in Ohio. So I just want to make that note that it wasn't only the president who was responding to this virus, it was also governors who had significant authority according to the Constitution, which devolves that level of state leadership and autonomy when it comes to policing power. And I think some of that needs to be reflected down to the state level.
I agree.
But the question you're asking now specifically about should the president have nominated a justice, the answer is unequivocally and absolutely yes. It's very clear in Article 2 of the Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, that it is the president's responsibility to nominate judges of the Supreme Court. And then it's the Senate's responsibility to advise and consent. Advise and consent. So I think that the president is absolutely doing what he should be doing. It's his constitutional obligation. And now it's up to the Senate, who, depending upon the party in power, if you look at history and precedent, the party in power aligned with the president gets that done almost all the time. 17 out of 19 times, the Senate, that's in the same power of the president, they have a nominee that comes in his last year. They get that nominee through, confirmed, and that nominee is sitting on the bench. Whereas, and this was the case in 16, President Obama did his duty. He nominated a justice for the Supreme Court, Merrick Garland, but the party in power in the Senate was not the same party as the president. And over the course of history, there have been maybe one or two justices of, I think, 9 or 10, wherein those justices actually made it through. Most of the justices do not. That's why the Senate is so important. The Senate has the ability to decide with its own autonomy and its power what it's going to do with the nominees of the president. So absolutely, the president should have nominated and has nominated, correctly so, a justice who I think is absolutely phenomenal, Justice Barrett. Her record is phenomenal. The persona, the way that she lives life, she seems like a dynamic candidate and somebody that will help improve the court to focus on the Constitution as it was written so that future generations of Americans can prosper as ones have gone before us previously.
Do you believe, as many on the left, that there should be a religious test of the Supreme Court justice?
Yeah, Ken, you and I agree on this one. That's very clear in Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution that no religious test shall ever be required as any qualification for any office or public trust under the United States. I think it's sickening to see how that religious test has been absolutely leveraged and used by Democratic members of the Senate. It was Judge Barrett's confirmation hearings for the appellate seat that she was on, where she was told by Senator Dianne Feinstein, the Democrat senator from California, that the dogma lives loudly inside of you. And she was saying that as a disparaging remark to argue that her religious views are not welcome for somebody that's on the court. And that's wrong, and that is ahistorical, and it contradicts the reason why that article was written.
Indeed. John, who is the author of Bellwether Blues, and we're going to talk about that book in just one moment. But I wanted to show this to you. This is an envelope that I received from the District of Columbia. I didn't ask for it. It has nothing to do with taxes or anything of that nature. It is a mail-in ballot. And literally, all someone had to do was open the ballot like this, fill it in, and then mail it back. Do you believe that voter fraud is real? Or do you believe, as the left, that it is merely an illusion of the dogmatic responses from Trump and his sycophants?
Yeah, so I deal quite a bit with this at being on the Board of Elections in Ohio, and thankfully I live in a state where we have great laws. We make it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And because Ohio is a swing state, there's been so much attention that's focused on the integrity of our elections year in, year out. So I live in a really good state wherein the process, I think, is sound and secure. However, as I've done research in other states, states like Nevada, for example, and you see cases in Pennsylvania wherein you send ballots out freely. I mean, we're not talking about applications. In Ohio, we have an application process. You have to send in an application, and you receive a ballot. In states like Nevada, they send ballots out to all these homes, and in some of the counties and in some of these states, there are actually more registered voters than there are people in the county.
Yes.
What's going to happen with all of those extra ballots? I mean, it creates at least the possibility for someone with manipulative means or desires from either side. I don't care if either side sees all these extra ballots and then goes and potentially could fill those out and increases the probability of fraud. In the 2005 commission between James Baker and Jimmy Carter, a bipartisan commission, identified the number one issue of the future being if a state embraces ballot harvesting with mail-in voting, universal mail-in voting, where you send ballots to homes, and then ballot harvesting, where people can come to your home and take your ballot and drop it off. Now, what we just saw with breaking news this last week in Judicial Watch, I don't know if you saw this, Ken, but Ilhan Omar,
Yes.
and the group of the network that she has created on video, documented evidence of members that are trying to manipulate the votes of the Somali community, which numbers about 90,000 people in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. There is documented evidence of voter fraud that is occurring that reaches thousands of voters. And as we know, even in a presidential election, the election can come down to just hundreds of votes.
Yeah.
Maybe a few thousand votes. That can change the nature of an election. So there absolutely is cause for concern. And I wish that states would have put aside some of the partisan nature of wanting to create universal mail-in voting and would have followed really common sense logic to make sure that it was easy to vote and hard to cheat.
Listen, there are people who are listening to Unite in Washington, D.C., and they say that statements like that are oppressive ones, that you are trying to create an environment where minorities and others will not be able to participate in the electoral process. Is having ID or making it easy to vote, hard to cheat, a guarantee of discrimination or disestablishment?
I don't believe so at all. In fact, as you look at the participation of minority voters over recent history and in the last election, you've seen that it's gone up. And in the state of Ohio, it's now easier to vote than ever before. If you could have turned back the clock 50 years ago and would have said, imagine us sending a application to your home, you put it in the mail, and a government worker will come, pick that application up, take it back to the Board of Elections. They will send you then a ballot. That government worker will drop it off. You fill it out. The government worker picks it up and takes it back to the post office. I mean, that would have been game-breaking access to the ballot box. Not only that, but we have early voting in Ohio for over 30 days. Our early voting begins on October 6th. It's a little less than 30 days. It is easier to vote than ever before. Now, the critical balance of that, because we want elections of integrity. I don't care if you're white, black, purple. I don't care who you are. You want to make sure that the vote is accurate, that there are ethics in the process. We don't want anybody cheating. I don't care which side you come from or who you are. You got to make sure that we prevent those that have manipulative motives from having access to doing manipulative things, like we just saw in Minneapolis with the Ilhan Omar case. So those two
Exactly.
things need to be balanced together. And it is not racist at all. I think it's American to want to find ways to make sure that people have access to the ballot box, but that we do it in a secure manner.
Do you think the Somali Americans are cheating themselves by only taking $300 from their vote? Shouldn't that vote be a little bit more costly? In my opinion, I think it should be. But what is yours?
The ability to vote in America is like hitting the jackpot.
Yeah.
One of the things that I recognize being an American and being born in a home with a family that cares and taught the Bible, I hit the jackpot. Ken, I've traveled the world. I've been to East Africa. I've been to Southeast Asia. I've been to Latin America. I've been nonprofit in Guatemala. I've done a lot of work in India with victims of trafficking, and I've seen all sorts of ministries. I've seen all sorts of poverty. I've seen all sorts of corruption throughout the world, and it's one of the things that really made me appreciate what America is. We truly have been blessed. God has blessed America in ways that are even hard to describe and imagine. Miracles of epic proportion. And the bounty that we have to live off of, the amazing access we have to technology, the resources we have, even the poor of the Americans that are out there, they have it better off than some of the poor that live in places where there is no social safety net. There is no access to food, children literally starving. When I looked at that and asked the question, what is it that makes America exceptional? Why are we unique amongst the nations of the earth? It really goes back to the foundation established upon Judeo-Christian values, with the recognition that every human being, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they believe, is inherently and has dignity, inherent dignity, and is infinitely valuable in the eyes of God. And that goes to the Declaration of Independence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. When I look at that statement in the Declaration of Independence, which cast the vision for our nation, that's the foundation that led us to where we are today, and why, as Americans, we must count our blessings. We really must count them, because God has given us incredible opportunities here that many people do not have around the world.
Exactly. Uh, Going to your book, because a lot of individuals have a great fear in America of being that one last generation that Ronald Reagan spoke of, forgive me, of losing our rights, our heritage. And I asked you, is the millennial group that generation? Should we be fearful that the ones that follow after them will never know what freedom and liberty are all about?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal quote, and it rings true today as it did back when he said it. We're one generation away from losing our freedom. The millennials are probably the most maligned generation, but they're also probably the most misunderstood generation in American history. It's the largest generation in American history, and it's the least religious generation in American history. But because of its size, there's a lot of nuance to this generation, and it's individuals aged between 24 and 39 years of age. No longer are millennials on campuses. They're now in homes. They're now in jobs. They're in the economy. They're participating in daily life. And millennials in the West Coast and East Coast are very different from millennials in the mainland. Millennials in California are different from millennials in Ohio. We've grown up with different values. We've grown up in different communities with different contexts, and that informs the way that we view the world. What I saw, Ken, as I did an investigation in Swain County, America, and mainland America, was that there is a major difference between these kinds of millennials. And what was happening to millennials in mainland is they saw a radical shift of the left to the left. They saw the left going so radically far left of center that it left many millennials in mainland America in its wake. And those millennials are skeptical, frustrated, disillusioned. They've caught a case of the blues. That's the title of the
Yes.
book, Bellwether Blues. And that has led them to a position where they really don't know where to turn. They can't quite embrace conservative values because it's something that they've been taught to hate, but they're really struggling with where the left has gone. And that's where the case for conservatism steps in. We have to be effective at persuading and awakening the soul. And that's really the purpose of this book.
I think it's a great purpose indeed. When it comes to voting, however, when we think of the generations, it doesn't seem to be a great number of participants in the under 30 group. But the older you get, the more you get involved in the voting process. And many of us in our generation are under the concern that maybe the millennial generation will be voting for Biden rather than for Trump. Can you assuage my fears and my concerns?
Well, I think if we go to the coast, you're probably right. Many will, no question about it. I think it's, however, in mainland America, in states like Ohio and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, President Trump will do a lot better with millennials in these swing states than he will on the coast. The question is how well will he do? And that's where there's a lot of questions, a big question mark. One of the things that should be noticed was in the midterms of 2018, there was a big shift amongst millennials. Whereas in 2016, they didn't really come out. The voter participation rate was incredibly low. In 2018 midterms, there was a record-setting amount of millennials that came out in that election. I think the participation rate doubled, and this was from a general to a midterm. Well, I think I was comparing the midterms from 18 and 14. Well, that
Yes.
participation increase spoke to the power of this voting bloc, which means that no longer can conservatives, Republicans, avoid, ignore, and disregard the millennial voting bloc. They need to embrace it and find ways to inform it and persuade it. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is one thing that has really, I think, been played out over COVID-19 is the recognition that there are certain autocratic ideals of the left that millennials really disagree with. When you empower a governor and he shuts down your life and
Mm.
shuts it down to the full, and you feel the pressure of that, the libertarian, the flair for freedom rises up within the millennial. And they're the least, amongst all the generations, the least that likes the COVID shutdown and all of the mini regulations that they have to face, especially in states where it's been much more oppressive, which are primarily led by Democratic governors. So that libertarian flair, that flair for freedom, which I think is uniquely American. Americans, we're born with a desire for freedom. It's part of our instincts. It's in our anthems, it's in our songs, it's kind of who we are. But the second thing that millennials really value, even though it's a maligned generation, millennials really value compassion. I mean, think about
Mm.
all the causes that millennials stand for. A lot of millennials take lower paying jobs in order for them to participate in a cause. They've seen previous generations struggle and strive to identify purpose without the ability to really ever achieve it. And they've said, I'm not going for that. I want to find something that drives purpose and hope into my life. So when we can wrap our policies around compassion and describe how policies impact the least of these. And I think the RNC convention did a phenomenal job bringing
Yes.
stories out of everyday people who have benefited from the policies of this president and from this party. But when you tie those two things together, compassion and freedom, that's when you begin to reach the millennial soul.
Got to ask you here before we close out, and I want you to talk about bellwether blues and how people can get it. But in finality, the question is this: we're sitting back virtually about 20 some odd days away from making a decision of whether we continue on the pathway of low taxes, less government, uh, greater liberty and freedom, or Marxism. And the reason why I bring up the point of Marxism is that the Federalists reported that 95% of all the riots that took place in America this year were initiated by Black Lives Matter. And a lot of people feel compassion towards what happened with George Floyd, police brutality, things of that particular nature. But they've also been manipulated. They've been manipulated to the point where they're being used and abused by the leftist machine. What can we do to stop that from happening? What should we do as conservatives to reach a population that have been manipulated by race and discrimination and intimidation as well?
Yeah, I think the way that we have to communicate the message is with grace and truth. One
Yes.
of the things that was amazing about the greatest human, the perfect, the only perfect person to ever live, that being Jesus, is when he came down from heaven as the Son of God, he came full of grace and truth. And he did so in an era that was incredibly difficult, but he lived that out perfectly. And I think if we can follow that model and communicate truth, which is sometimes hard to swallow, but do it with grace, we can earn the right to be heard. And I think millennials need to hear the message that policy making is much more than personality. The
Yes.
7 millennials in Bellwether Blues who changed their voting habits from the left to the right did so because they came to that awakening. They came to that recognition that when you're voting for somebody to be in an office of government, you're not voting on the basis of their fame or their communication style or how they look or how much fame or popularity they have. You're really voting on the basis of what they believe in, because what they believe in is what they're going to act upon, and what they act upon is going to have implications for all of our lives. So we must communicate that the role of a leader in government is that of an institution. It's that of power. And what decisions they make that have implications in our life are the decisions that we must pay the most attention to. I know a lot of millennials here in Northwest Ohio really struggle, for example, with the president's strong character and what he did in the debate and how hard he went after him and some of the things that he said. There's a lot of voters I speak to that really struggle with that. So as individuals who understand what the conservative cause can do, what conservative principles will do for human flourishing, we have to try to bring them back into the recognition that it's those principles that matter more than anything else, because those will be the longest lasting with the deepest impacts and the most externalities on society. And that, coupled with the judges that President Trump has named and placed on the court, and another 4 years, what he would be able to do will change the court in an incredible manner that will have benefits that will last for 40 to 50 years.
I said that would be my last question, but I'm curious because I do want you to come back because the millennial population is so intrinsically important to this election process. But let me just throw this out there. Will we see in your generation the end of Roe v. Wade?
There's a real possibility. I think we're closer now than we ever have been. Now, as you know, there's the idea that with the court being a potential Judge Barrett on the court, if she is able to pass through and is confirmed as the next justice, I think we now have at minimum a 5-4, maybe even a 6-3 balance when it comes to Roe v. Wade cases. But the thing that I think is most likely to happen, Ken, is that that's going to be sent back to the states. So a post-Roe v. Wade era looks like state autonomy and decision-making on how they want to handle abortion laws. So one of the things that I think we have to do, those of us who believe in the pro-life message and ethic, which I think is one of the most powerful arguments that can be made on the basis of human dignity and freedom, and it really transforms the perspective of somebody, is we have to recognize that the battle's not done if the court decides it. In fact, the battle's just beginning. Now we have to do a lot more work to continue to emphasize to individuals why abortion is unthinkable. The moment when we make it unthinkable, not just illegal, but unthinkable, is the moment we start to really win culture and we start to see a transformation of heart and mind.
Jonathan Jakubowski, it is a tremendous honor to have you on tonight. How can people get Bellwether Blues? Do they have to go to Amazon? Do they go to your website? How do they get that?
Yeah, so it's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever books are sold. We have Kindle, we have audio. You can check that out online as well. And then on my website, we actually have some small videos, minute-long videos or so of the 7 stories that were in Bellwether Blues if you kind of want to see some of that played out. So wherever books are sold, and our website is bellwetherbluesbook.com if you want to check out the videos.
There you go. Bellwether Blues. I will be checking them out. Thank you so much. We look forward to you coming back very soon.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate the invite.
Thank you. Man, I'm telling you, the future's bright. Oh my God, the future is very bright in America. Ladies and gentlemen, when we come back from the break, I want to talk with you at least a hush. Not of your spirit, but of your fear. More about that right after these messages.